There is a moment, documented, verified, sitting quietly in the National Archives, that no historian has ever satisfactorily explained. At 10:13 p.m. on April 14th, 1865, a man named Thomas Eckert, head of the War Department's Telegraph office, received a message. He read it, set it down, and said nothing to anyone for the next 47 minutes. During those 47 minutes, President Abraham Lincoln was shot. That Friday morning, Abraham Lincoln walked into a cabinet meeting in an unusually strange mood. His Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, noticed it immediately. Lincoln's face carried the hollowed, glassy look that those who knew him associated with only one thing. He had dreamed again. Lincoln had a recurring dream. He had described it many times to his inner circle, always with the same detail. He was aboard a ship, moving with tremendous speed toward a dark and formless shore. He told his cabinet that morning that he had dreamed it the night before. Lincoln said, "I have always found that this dream preceded great and momentous events." Lincoln was statistically correct. Every time he reported that dream, within 48 hours, the United States experienced a seismic event. He had the dream, and 15 hours later, John Wilkes Booth would stand behind him. Lincoln had not particularly wanted to attend Ford's Theater that night. He was tired. The war, though ending, had aged him beyond measure. Those who saw him that spring described a man who looked 70, though he was only 56. A man with the eyes of someone who had personally carried the weight of 600,000 dead. But the theater had already announced he would attend. Tickets had been sold on the promise of his presence. Washington society expected the victorious president. Mary Todd had already selected her outfit. He could not cancel. Public perception in politics is a cage. At 9 a.m. that morning, a messenger arrived at the White House. 3 separate men declined to accompany the Lincolns. Grant departed by train. Sherman was in the field, and Thomas Eckert, Lincoln's personal choice for escort, was told by Stanton he was needed at the Telegraph office. Stanton himself declined to attend. Stanton's refusal is the thread that, if you pull it, begins to unravel something deeply unsettling. He denied Lincoln his preferred bodyguard. He refused to attend himself. He stationed himself at the Telegraph office on the night of the assassination. What does a man who fears nothing fear most? And what does he do to ensure he is near power when power shifts? John Frederick Parker was Lincoln's assigned bodyguard that night. He had an extraordinary record of incompetence. He had been brought before the police board multiple times, sleeping on duty, visiting a brothel in uniform, using offensive language toward citizens. Why was this man guarding the president on the last night of Abraham Lincoln's life? Parker was assigned by Mary Todd, Lincoln's secretary. The paperwork still exists. It is signed and processed. Nobody stopped it. At 10:07 p.m., Parker left his post outside the presidential box to find a better view of the stage. He stopped at the saloon next door for a drink. He was still there when the shoot was fired. Parker was never court-martialed, never seriously punished. The charges were, mysteriously, without explanation, dropped. He returned to duty. Whether Parker was manipulated, bribed, or simply himself, the gap he created lasted exactly long enough, which John Wilkes Booth had not acted alone. This was a coordinated conspiracy. While Booth entered Ford's Theater, 2 other men were simultaneously attacking Secretary of State William Seward at his home, nearly killing him. And a 3rd man was meant to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson. It was a decapitation plot. Someone knew. The conspiracy had been whispered about in Washington's underground for weeks. Intelligence agents had fragments of it. And yet, at 10:13 p.m., when a telegraph operator at the War Department received a message that should have triggered immediate action, nothing happened. Thomas Eckert was the most powerful telegrapher in America. At 10:13, p.m., a message came through. The exact contents remain sealed under the original War Department archive order from 1865. What we know, Eckert did not relay it upward. He did not dispatch a rider to Ford's Theater. He waited. Lincoln was shot at 10:15 p.m. 2 minutes, that is the margin. 2 minutes between a message Eckert received and the gunshot that changed American history forever. The horror of history is that both things can be true. Catastrophic mistake or calculated silence, and we will never know which one it was. Lincoln was shot at 10:15 p.m. The bullet entered behind his left ear. He would never regain consciousness. Because the man who took control, completely, absolutely, with an authority that technically belonged to no one, was Edwin Stanton. Not Vice President Andrew Johnson, not any cabinet member. Stanton. He sealed the city. He controlled all dispatches. He directed the investigation. He personally interviewed witnesses. He issued orders as though he were already commander-in-chief. He reportedly said, standing over Lincoln's dying body at the Peterson House across from the theater, "Now he belongs to the ages." Stanton ran the United States government for 8 hours between Lincoln's shooting and his death, as if he had been preparing for exactly this scenario. After Lincoln's death, Stanton deliberately delayed notifying Vice President Johnson that he was now president. Johnson, sleeping in his hotel room 4 blocks away, was not officially informed for nearly 3 hours. 3 hours in which Stanton ran the executive branch alone. John Wilkes Booth was shot dead 12 days later in a Virginia barn on April 26th, before he could be questioned extensively. He kept a diary. It was found on his body. When it was delivered to the War Department, to Stanton, it contained 18 pages. When it was presented as evidence in the conspiracy trial months later, it contained 18 pages. But investigators noticed something. The diary had page stubs, pages that had been cut out, removed cleanly by someone with access to the diary between its capture and its presentation at trial. During the 1867 Congressional investigation, Congressman Benjamin Butler confronted Stanton directly about the missing diary pages. Stanton claimed they were missing when the diary arrived at his office. No one else had logged the diary. No chain of custody document survived. The missing pages have never been found. Their contents remain entirely unknown. What did those pages say? Perhaps the names of co-conspirators, too dangerous to surface. Perhaps nothing. And that is the cruelest thing history does to us. It doesn't always give us resolution. It gives us absence. And absence, the psychologists tell us, is something the human mind cannot tolerate. We fill it with meaning. We always fill it with meaning. Remember the third conspirator, George Atzerodt, a German immigrant carriage painter with no political convictions, recruited purely for money. He lost his nerve entirely, drank himself into a stupor in the hotel bar, went to his room, went to sleep. He was captured, tried, and hanged. But here is what nobody discusses. Andrew Johnson survived that night, and Andrew Johnson then became president. And Andrew Johnson was, perhaps, the single most catastrophic successor Abraham Lincoln could have had. Johnson dismantled Reconstruction. Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Johnson gave the former Confederate states back to the very men who had led the rebellion. The black Americans who had been promised freedom found themselves re-enslaved through black codes, through sharecropping, through terror. All under a president who openly declared that America was a government of white men. The Confederacy lost the war, but it won the peace, and it won the peace because the wrong man died and the wrong man lived. The conspiracy's true tragedy was not that it succeeded in killing Lincoln. Its true tragedy, the one that echoes through every subsequent decade of American racial violence, of Jim Crow, of justice deferred by a century, is that it failed to kill Andrew Johnson. Booth believed he was saving the South. He did save it, but not the way he imagined. And that survival was the result of a coward who drank instead of acted. The most consequential decision in American history after the Civil War was made by a drunk carriage painter who did absolutely nothing. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is documented history. That is what the archives actually say. And that should unsettle you far more than any missing diary page.